So the other day I was on Goodreads, and by the other day I mean several weeks ago, and I looked at my read list on Goodreads for the first time in a very long time. In the past year, in all of 2019, I have read 4 books in their entirety, which I think we can all agree is just not a lot of books. Not only that, but the very first book that I read this year was all the way in September. So it took me 9 months to pick up a book. And the only reason I decided to read that book is because, for those of you that may not know, I live in China, and China has this big firewall across all of the internet. So basically you can't access Western social media sites such as Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, unless you have a VPN. And so I decided to read that book because my VPN was down. I kind of go into these patterns of reading and not reading, especially, like I said, in the past few years, as I have become more and more entrenched in binging internet content, and particularly reading a lot of fan fiction, probably more fan fiction than the average person. I would often lose sight of how wonderful an experience just reading something that's published and that has been edited and written and rewritten several times over. I've just been trying to think, you know, where did it all go wrong? Where did this reading drought begin? And how can I prevent it from happening in the future? And I think the main reason is just laziness on my part. That's a bit self-explanatory. I just didn't really have the motivation to pick up a book and read it. But past just sheer laziness, I think that a lot of it has to do with 3 main issues in my life. Internet, mainly getting a laptop, working at a library, and being an English major. And so the last 2 things maybe sound very ironic, because it's like, you would think that working at a library would make you read more, and you would think that being an English major would obviously make you read more. But for me, it was the opposite. The first reason is, I think, pretty obvious. I bought my first laptop in high school, and it was a revelation for me. Gone were the days when I kept my nose in a book all day. Suddenly my nose was in my laptop at all hours of the day. And since I invested so much of my time into the internet, into Tumblr and YouTube and all of those things, I suddenly had no room in my life for reading. So that's the first thing that really hindered my reading progress. The second was working at a library. So I got my job at the library that I worked at in junior year of high school, and I was thrilled to get the job because it was the first part-time job I had ever gotten. Honestly, you don't do a lot of work and you still get paid a decent amount, so it was really good. Like, the work was super easy for the amount that I was being paid. I mean, I know this might be obvious to some people, but it wasn't obvious to me that when I started working at the library, I would no longer want to spend my free time there. I was now spending sometimes up to or over 20 hours a week at that library. Maybe if I had worked in the adult department, I could have read a bit more, because I could have hidden in the stacks and read after I had finished my shelving. I know a lot of adult pages did that, but since I worked in the children's department, it was so small that I couldn't really hide. And even though they did have some young adult books up there, none of them were really books that I was that interested in reading at that time. And there was the added detail that I am very much an introvert, as I think many people on BookTube are, and I really didn't want to deal ever with going into the library when I wasn't on my shift and having to engage in small talk with all of my coworkers who I now knew. I really loved the anonymity that came with going to the library as a kid. Just going. Nobody would ask me if I needed help unless I specifically went up to them looking for help. I wasn't a librarian. I think if I were a librarian, obviously I would read more. But since I was just a page, didn't really work out for me. Doesn't mean it's not gonna work out for you, so don't let this deter you from trying to get a job at a library if you think that's something that you would enjoy. And then the third thing on the list that maybe is the most controversial is that being an English major really made me stop reading, but particularly reading for leisure. I mean, I didn't often even read the books that I was assigned cover to cover, unless you're watching and you're one of my professors, in which case I read every single book cover to cover. In my free time, I really didn't do any reading in university. I think that a big reason for that is that my homework was largely comprised of reading for class. And so since reading became most of my homework, I didn't want to spend my free time reading because suddenly reading equaled work, you know? Additionally, I just think I have that sickness that a lot of people have, where if something is assigned to you, you suddenly don't want to read it, even if it is a book that you might have been interested in. But yeah, since I was being assigned all of these books, all of this literature, I had to write these papers and analyze and all of that. It's just like, I really just couldn't. I couldn't read in my free time anymore. For mindless consumption, I watched a lot of YouTube in college. I watched a lot of Netflix. And I took up other hobbies such as cosplay and travel, which aren't things that I necessarily regret doing, but I do think that my time could have been better managed. With that being said, the 4 books that I have read this year are as follows. The first one, as I said, read in September, was Warcross by Marie Lu. And the second book was, you may have guessed, Wildcard by Marie Lu. The other 2 books that I read were the first 2 books in the To All the Love Boy... too long for me. The first 2 books in the To All the Boys I've Loved Before series by Jenny Han. So I gave Warcross 4 stars. And I also gave Wildcard 4 stars. I really loved the world building that Marie Lu did. I thought that it was a really relevant topic and a really interesting way of approaching it. Basically, in these 2 books, they're set in a world where VR has kind of overtaken the world and it's become like a really vital part of society. And she explores kind of like how far is too far in terms of that type of technology. Instead of like football or soccer being like the most popular sport, it's Warcross, which is a virtual reality game. Emika hacks her way accidentally onto the Warcross championships because she was trying to steal a power-up that she could have sold for a very large sum of money because she's in a bit of a tight spot. But when she does this, she accidentally reveals herself to the entire world. You know, everyone has seen her, and so suddenly she gets thrown into this wild world of Warcross, and it's just a really fun 2 books. I really enjoyed them. I thought that the storyline was a tad bit predictable, but I really enjoyed all the characters. I thought that she had a wonderful, diverse cast of characters in there, and they were all pretty decently developed. I liked all of the relationships between the characters, and yeah, it was just an enjoyable read, really quick. Like I said, read the first book in 1 day. I absolutely loved her Legend series as a kid. It was one of my favorites, so her stuff has a really special place in my heart. As for the 2 Jenny Han books that I rated both of those books 3 stars. I initially rated them 2 stars, to be honest, but I bumped it up because I thought, you know, no, I actually did enjoy those books. So, you know, I liked these books, but in a realer sense, I didn't like these books. I had very conflicting feelings reading these books. I just didn't really care about the characters that much, and since I didn't care about the characters, I subsequently did not care about the main conflicts of the story. I think that's something that's really important for me to keep in mind, and for you to keep in mind, is that I am a 22-year-old lady. So I really know that I'm not the intended audience for this series. I think that had I read this book in high school or middle school, maybe I would have liked it a lot better. If for nothing else, just the fact that Lara Jean is half Asian and I would have connected to that. And I didn't really care for any specific boy. They were all very similar. Lara Jean definitely has a type. And while they did diversify it in the movie, in the book I just wish that there had been a bit more diversity in terms of characters, because really Lara Jean and her family are like the only ones that aren't white. Kind of relatable because like, girl, same, I grew up in a white neighborhood, but still. I think there was just more opportunity for the characters to just be a bit more diverse and a bit more interesting. The main thing that really ground my gears was some of the conflicts that arose between Lara Jean and her older sister Margot. It just felt so silly to me that Lara Jean and Margot would have such a massive fight over a fucking boy, let alone one as boring as Josh. And I did want to mention that I am aware that like the main reason that Margot and Lara Jean fought was probably because of like the broken trust between them. Like Lara Jean didn't disclose to Margot that they kissed, but still it just wasn't my cup of tea. I still don't love it, even though I do realize that that's the main reason. Probably like it's probably just bigger than Josh. I just like honestly skipped through that entire fight because it was just so silly to me. Another thing that I didn't love, and this was also, I think all of my problems stemmed from Lara Jean and Margot's relationship, because I really hated how Lara Jean viewed virginity, but specifically how she was obsessed with Margot's virginity. It just was weird to me. It didn't hit right. It felt a bit uncomfy to me. And again, maybe this is because I am a 22-year-old lady and these things don't matter to me, but it just felt weird to me that she was so upset about the fact that Margot had sex and hadn't told her. I was like, girl, I know that you guys are close, but she doesn't really owe you that. It just, I wasn't a fan of that. I didn't like it, and I'm sorry. I really did try to go into these books with a neutral opinion, you know. I had seen the movie, but I didn't think it was anything revolutionary. Like, I thought it was cute, I enjoyed it, but I wasn't going in thinking, oh, this is the best book I'm ever going to read. And I really wanted to like it, because it's a cute book, and it's like a romance, and it features a mixed girl, and I just thought that, you know, high school me would have loved it probably, but adult me, young adult me, new adult me, really, not young adult anymore, I guess. New adult me was not a huge fan. And I'm sorry if you really enjoy these books, but I probably won't continue in the series because, like I said, I just don't really care about the characters that much. And again, I know that the things that I had problems with were probably like learning experiences, and they were meant to teach Lara Jean and the readers a lesson, and you know, you're supposed to see how their bond, even though there's like conflict, their bond is unbreakable and even stronger now that they've communicated, but it just bothered me. I'm sorry. But yeah, those are the 4 books that I read this year. So a 3.5 average. Not too bad, actually. I'm thinking that my next video will either be going to Shanghai to shop for books, because I will be going into Shanghai for Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. I'm gonna be going to Disneyland on Christmas Day, actually. I think I'm gonna be filming that, so even though it's not book related, I might still post a little vlog because I'm really excited. But on Christmas Eve, I do plan on hitting at least 1 bookstore, hopefully more than 1. So I was thinking either vlogging, yeah, going book shopping in Shanghai, or maybe resolutions, bookish resolutions for 2020, because as you can imagine, I have many resolutions. If those videos seem like something you'd be interested in, feel free to stick around. I'd love to have you. Yeah, thanks for watching. See you later.